McLaren's Formula 1 revival was on shaky ground for the first half of 2023, but its recent upturn in form gives hope to fans of the papaya team that it's very much back on target. Lando, Norris and Piastri starred in qualifying at the British Grand Prix, taking second and third on the grid, and they would have finished there but for an unfortunately timed safety car that meant Piastri dropped to fourth behind Lewis Hamilton. That's a dramatic turnaround for a team that was at the back as recently as the Miami Grand Prix in May and looked in danger of falling permanently behind its midfield rivals. The car was so impressive at Silverstone that Lewis Hamilton called it a rocket ship. So was this a one-off, or are there signs of a genuine resurgence for McLaren? What changes has it made to its car, and what still needs to be done if it's to re-emerge as a front-running force in the coming years? The team admitted at the start of the season that its car had problems, but a major floor upgrade introduced for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix represented a significant change in direction, better suited to the 2023 regulations and the floor edges that have been raised by 15mm. That upgrade gave a lap time boost of 2 or 3 tenths of a second, but the big performance step was promised with the introduction of what team principal Andrea Stella described as what some may call a kind of B-spec car. He also said that upgrade was a potentially even bigger conceptual step than Baku compared to the launch car. A big chunk of that promised package was introduced for the Austrian Grand Prix weekend. Only Norris had the upgrade there after McLaren pulled out all the stops to accelerate production of the parts. Piastri got that upgrade for Silverstone, although his car was still half a step behind Norris's thanks to the introduction of a new front wing that was completed on the eve of the weekend. While McLaren was confident of a strong qualifying performance, it didn't expect to be the closest challenger to Red Bull. Norris qualified second, a quarter of a second slower than Max Verstappen, with Piastri another tenth back, with that gap largely in line with the step expected from the front wing that only Norris had. This was comfortably McLaren's most impressive qualifying performance of the season. While Norris was third in Barcelona, the deficit there was more than twice what it was at Silverstone, and in Spain, Verstappen was able to abort his final Q3 lap because he was already assured of pole position. At Silverstone, he needed that final lap to steal pole away from Norris. While team principal Andrea Stella admitted the conditions at Silverstone, relatively cool and with qualifying starting on a drying track, are generally good for McLaren, the upgrade was also part of the step forward. The car is now strong in fast corners and has made some improvements in slower turns. That meant Silverstone is well suited to its strengths. The big question going into the race was whether McLaren's Spanish Grand Prix fate would be repeated, with poor race pace thanks to tyre management trouble. But given Norris had a strong run to 5th in the Austrian Grand Prix in the upgraded car, he was hopeful after qualifying of being able to turn the strong grid position into a top 5 finish. And as it turns out, he was able to do a lot more than that, leading the first 4 laps before inevitably being passed by Verstappen. Norris then ran second ahead of Piastri until Kevin Magnussen's Haas ground to a halt and brought out first the virtual and then the full safety car. Piastri had already stopped, so he dropped to 4th behind Lewis Hamilton, and McLaren had a tough decision to make over which tyres to give Norris. He wanted softs, which some other cars took, but McLaren wanted to put fresh hards on rather than used softs. When the virtual safety car was upgraded to a full safety car, McLaren would have liked to go to softs instead because the pack would be closed up, but Stella said it would have caused an operational problem, with a late switch to softs potentially costing Norris time in the pit stop. Norris did a superb job at the restart to hold off Hamilton's attack in the first couple of laps after racing resumed and took a superb second, only 3.7 seconds behind Verstappen. Piastri chased Hamilton home in 4th, giving McLaren a haul of 30 points that catapulted it ahead of Alpine into 5th in the Constructors' Championship. So what exactly has McLaren changed over the past couple of races? Well, according to our resident Grand Prix winning technical director Gary Anderson, it was heavily influenced by the Red Bull concept. The first big difference was the change in the radiator inlet at the front of the side pod. By reducing the opening profile of the leading edge of the side pod, McLaren increased the height of the inlet and made it into more of a letterbox. This increases the side pod undercut volume to allow more airflow to go through that area at higher speed. This will improve the scavenging effect this airflow will have on the front corner of the floor and improve the performance of the diffuser. With the increased height in the radiator inlet opening and the lower inlet surface extended forward, McLaren has followed Alpine by creating an increased gutter where the top surface of the side pods blend into the chassis and the engine cover sides. This is to allow more of the airflow that goes over the top of the side pod to influence the beam wing and diffuser nearer the centre line of the car. It also creates a channel for the excess radiator flow at higher speed when the radiator system just isn't able to take in all of the mass airflow that's thrown at it. This excess flow will vary from track to track as the cooling requirements change, but in general it will start to increase as speeds go above 200 km an hour. This means that at high speeds, when the underfloor and a diffuser are working hard, the consistency of flow out of the rear of the car through the Coke bottle and over the diffuser is improved, reducing the chances of airflow separation in the underfloor, which triggers porpoising. To improve the airflow through the centre line of the car, McLaren also revised the fairings on the upper surface of the trailing edge of the halo. The front corner of the underfloor detail is very similar to the previous version, but it's further rearward that the floor edge detail has changed. McLaren previously had a small inlet to allow the upper floor surface flow to connect up to the tyre squirt as the tyre rotates onto the track surface. But with the revised airflow structure, McLaren has now gone for a more mechanical seal. So this means you are relying on the proximity of the floor to the ground to seal the underfloor rather than doing so aerodynamically. That can lead to porpoising problems, but if you can avoid that, this can be very effective. The small hole on the lower edge of the diffuser sidewall allows the low pressure in the diffuser to pull that tyre squirt flow inboard of the tyre contact patch. This makes the floor's outboard edge sealing area work more efficiently. Most teams have a small tunnel in this area to reduce the flat surface area. The bigger the flat surface area, the more on-off the sealing would be as the gap to the ground changes with speed, roll, braking and bumps. You want to minimise the effect these changes would have on the car's underfloor performance. McLaren has also gone for a gentler radius on the top corners of the diffuser. This is reckoned to be part of a much larger underfloor geometry change, but that's a key area of the package we haven't yet seen. McLaren has also reduced the size of and lowered the cooling outlet at the rear of the engine cover. To work in tandem with this size reduction, it also opened up a slot on the trailing edge of the spine of the engine cover. This huge package was followed by the introduction of a new front wing and nose at Silverstone that ran only on Norris's car. Described by the team as completely revised, this new assembly conferred a flow conditioning and downforce gain. There were also minor tweaks to the rear brake ducts and the toe link shroud in the rear suspension. McLaren's upgraded car has only run at 2 tracks, so how sure can we be that it has taken a real step forward? Although it only had the 6th fastest car on average in the first part of the season, it was 2nd quickest at Silverstone and 3rd in Austria, so the trend is encouraging. What the last 2 weekends have demonstrated is that McLaren is not only capable of being in that tight battle for second best with Ferrari, Mercedes and Aston Martin on a good day, but it can even be at the front of it. But there's still reason to believe that on its weaker tracks it might drop out of that battle and be back in a fight with long-term rival Alpine. The McLaren is strong in high-speed corners but not so good in the slower stuff, particularly those with combination entries, so those demanding a lot of braking and turning at the same time. This puts it at the opposite end of the spectrum to Aston Martin, which is generally at its best in slower speed corners. At Silverstone, the Aston Martin struggled because in order to re-optimise the car for the high-speed corners, it compromised its lower speed strengths. Hence, as in Barcelona, its performance was not up to the standards it has set for much of the season. But for the next race in Hungary, there's every chance Aston Martin will be far stronger and McLaren less competitive. As for Mercedes, it was expecting to go well at faster tracks thanks to its recent improvements, but was bitterly disappointed with its outright pace at both the Red Bull Ring and Silverstone. The team made the most of its circumstances to bag a home podium for Lewis Hamilton, but it could be vulnerable to slipping to the back of this group again after a brief uplift with its major change of direction with the Monaco upgrade package. As for McLaren, there is still a long way to go. After qualifying, the race's Ed Straw asked Norris how much progress the team has made on fixing the underlying handling problems that have blighted it for years. Norris suggested that this was 70% not fixed, 30% fixed by just making the car quicker and adding downforce. What Norris means is that improved aerodynamic load and better performance papers over some of the cracks. But he also said that McLaren's inherent issues of the last 5 years are still a struggle to deal with. So this refers to what former McLaren driver Daniel Ricciardo once called the slightly peculiar characteristics of the McLaren. It's often been very difficult to drive, and as Norris said in an interview with the race at the end of last year, on a knife edge in corners. That's made it very tricky to drive in long-duration slower corners and inconsistent from lap to lap. But Norris also hinted that what he characterised as bigger and more fundamental problems can be tackled for next year to make the car more consistent. McLaren won't reproduce its Silverstone form at every race this year, but there is reason for optimism. The upgrade has delivered as hoped and is regarded as the first validation of the revised technical approach introduced by Stella after he took over as team principal for this season. He name-checked aerodynamics technical director Peter Prodromou as the key player in this, and one of the main motivations for the technical restructuring was to allow people like Prodromou to focus on design work rather than their efforts being diluted with other demands of a senior technical role. McLaren still has a long way to go, but after a dismal start to 2023, the recent progress confirms that it's at least back on the right track in its long battle to return to the front in Formula 1. And there's more upgrades to come, with new parts aimed at improving its race pace due for the Hungaroring. As CEO Zak Brown put it, McLaren is back in the game.